In this video, we're going to try to clear up some confusion with how typedef interacts with structure declarations in C. So here I've defined a struct, and you'll notice I have both a typedef and a struct name for this structure. And sometimes this gets confusing because there's multiple ways that you can define a structure in C. So structname is the name of the actual struct type. So structname defines a type name in C, and so I can use that as the type of a variable in my C program. Now typename is the name of a user-defined type that's defined to be this structure with 3 fields that you see here. So I can use typename by itself as the type of any variable in my C program. Now, why would you use structname versus typename? Well, one place where it's absolutely necessary is if you're including a pointer to your structure inside the structure itself. You'll see this a lot of times when you're doing linked data structures and that sort of thing. If I declare a field to be of type typename, notice typename isn't defined when it actually encounters that field. Typename is defined in the next line. So the compiler isn't going to know what that name is. But if I change it to structname, it does know what that name means because it's defined previously. And now it knows that, okay, this is going to be a pointer to a structure. So let's see some examples in code. So here I have a C file with 3 structures declared. The first structure is just a plain structure declaration. The second structure is a typedef declaration with no structure name. And the third has both a structure name and a typedef. So let's declare some variables of these different types. So if I try to say struct1, and I'll just call my variables s1 and s2 and so forth, and I'll initialize that with 1 and 2, you'll notice that I get an error. So the reason we're getting this is that if I hover over, you can see that struct1 is undefined. And I'll save the file and compile it just to show that that is a valid error. So in order to declare a variable of the first type, I need to say struct and then the struct name, and you'll notice the error goes away. Now for the second structure, notice there's no structure name there, so I have to use the type name, which is type2t. We'll call that s2, and that's how I would declare a variable of the second structure type. Now for the third type, I actually have 2 options. I can say struct3, or I can say type3t, and either of those works fine. So this third way, I get the option of deciding whether or not I want to use the struct name or the type name. And again, where this comes into play is if I wanted to define a type struct4, and then I want a pointer to this structure inside the structure. Well, if I call this type4t, I can't say type4t pointer here, because even though I don't get a warning here, when I compile, you'll see that I do get an error that that's an unknown type. So what I need to do is say that that's a struct pointer. And when I compile, you can see those errors go away. I still have these warnings that these variables are unused, but I know that they're not used. So I can add some code to get rid of those if I want. Let's go ahead and declare a variable of the 4th type. And let's go ahead and make sure we have a couple pointers, so let's make sure we initialize those as well. And I think that should be good. Yeah, so all my warnings are because of unused variables. So that's a pretty easy thing to fix. And I'll copy this. So S2, S3A, S3B, S4A, S3B. And these names change as well. For 3, we had E and F. And for 4, we have G and F. And I also want to add some spaces here. So let's compile this and run it. And it should compile without warnings, except that we have a couple of things here. That's because we have a float here in our struct4. So let's try this now. And we have an unknown conversion type character in format. Because that should be a D, or no, sorry, an F, not a 4. So if I run this, you can see that I get the results that I would expect. And I guess I should put a 0.2 here just to make those a little cleaner. So let's compile, let's run, and it looks like that's the output I'm looking for. So again, this is a quick introduction to the differences between defining structures with and without typedef. Again, in practice, this is going to be your best bet, is to give the structure a structure name and a type as well, and then you can use those interchangeably in your code. One other thing to keep in mind is that if you do happen to have a situation where you have a struct with, let's say the struct's name is struct1, and then I typedef this to struct1, that would be valid because it's a different namespace when you use struct and then a name versus just using the name as a type by itself. So again, I would recommend that when you do something like this, probably that you keep the names the same, like this, and then we would change this name as well. And that way you have some consistency between the struct name and the type name.